The most powerful empire in modern history wasn't built with armies. It wasn't built with territory. It was built with desire, and the man who built it understood something about human psychology so precise, so commercially devastating, that governments, economists, and behavioral scientists still study versions of it today. His name was Bernard Arnault, and the empire he built is called LVMH. Most people recognize the brands: Louis Vuitton, Dior, Givenchy, Bulgari, Moet, Dom Perignon, Tiffany, 67 of the most emotionally loaded brand names in modern culture, all operating inside one psychological system engineered to do the same thing: make ordinary people feel that one purchase moves them closer to a world they were never fully meant to enter. That is not luxury strategy. That is identity architecture. And to understand how Arnault built it, you have to understand what he saw that almost everyone else missed. In 1984, Bernard Arnault was a relatively unknown French businessman. He had money. He had ambition. But he didn't yet possess cultural leverage. Then he identified an opportunity that most financial minds dismissed entirely: a failing textile conglomerate called Boussac-Sampherès that happened to own one neglected asset buried deep inside its portfolio: Christian Dior. Arnault convinced the French government to support the acquisition. He paid roughly $15 million for control. Then he shocked the French business establishment. He stripped the conglomerate apart, sold nearly everything, and kept one thing: Dior. Because Arnault wasn't buying a textile company, he was buying accumulated meaning. Dior wasn't merely a fashion house. It was post-war Paris, elegance after scarcity, a symbol attached to decades of aspiration, prestige, and cultural memory. Arnault understood that this kind of symbolic authority could not be manufactured quickly. It had to be inherited, acquired, and then amplified. That became the first principle of his empire. Prestige cannot be built instantly, but the vessels carrying it can be purchased. And then he began collecting those vessels: Moet Hennessy, Louis Vuitton, Celine, L'Oreal, Givenchy, Berruti, Kenzo. Every acquisition followed the same logic: identify dormant cultural power, acquire it during vulnerability, install creative leadership capable of reigniting emotional relevance, then protect the brand's symbolic value with absolute discipline. But this is where Arnault's system becomes psychologically extraordinary. He didn't simply want the brands to be desirable. He wanted them to feel perpetually out of reach, even while selling them globally. That contradiction sits at the center of the entire LVMH system. The brands needed scale without losing prestige. They needed mass awareness without emotional accessibility. They needed customers to feel invited into the world, while simultaneously reminding them they were still outside its highest levels. So Arnault engineered something behavioral economists now describe as aspirational scarcity. At the surface level, the brands remain accessible: a Louis Vuitton wallet, a Dior lipstick, a bottle of Moet at dinner. Entry points priced within reach of aspirational consumers. Not because LVMH depends on those sales, but because it depends on psychological investment. Because the moment someone owns even a small piece of the brand, they enter a hierarchy they instinctively want to climb. And above that entry point, the system becomes increasingly restrictive: more expensive, more coded, private appointments, limited releases sold before public announcement, client relationships invisible to ordinary consumers. Every layer communicates the same message: there is always another level above you. That architecture does not merely encourage repeat purchasing, it creates permanent aspirational tension. The customer never fully arrives, because every achievement inside the system immediately reveals a higher tier beyond it. The destination stays visible. Completion never fully comes. Arnault understood something fundamental about human behavior. Aspiration becomes extraordinarily powerful once it attaches itself to identity. The moment a brand successfully connects itself to who someone wants to become, it stops behaving like a product. It starts behaving like psychological infrastructure. That became the second principle of the empire. Do not sell products to who people are. Sell symbols to who they hope to become. And Arnault understood that controlling desire required more than products alone. It required influence over the cultural environment surrounding those products. So LVMH embedded itself into the machinery that defines aspiration itself. Fashion publications, advertising ecosystems, celebrity networks, luxury media. The brands did not simply appear inside culture. They helped finance the institutions shaping cultural perception in the first place. When consumers encounter a product described as elegant, timeless, or essential, they are often encountering a narrative reinforced across an entire ecosystem connected to the same commercial structure. That is not simple advertising. It is narrative positioning at scale. Third principle: control the narrative surrounding desire, and you influence demand before the transaction even begins. But perhaps the most sophisticated element of the entire LVMH system is what Arnault understood about heritage. In a world moving faster every decade, where trends collapse quickly, technology becomes obsolete rapidly, and attention fragments constantly, heritage becomes one of the few forms of value that cannot be replicated on command. You cannot instantly create 2 centuries of craftsmanship. You cannot manufacture historical legitimacy overnight. You cannot artificially recreate the emotional weight of a name that has survived wars, recessions, generational shifts, and cultural reinvention while retaining prestige. This is why LVMH brands relentlessly emphasize archives, artisanship, founding stories, and continuity. These are not decorative marketing details. They are psychological anchors. They create the sensation that the brand exists outside ordinary time. And in an unstable world, where identity feels increasingly fluid and permanence feels rare, that perception becomes enormously valuable. Fourth principle: in an age of impermanence, brands that feel eternal command extraordinary premiums. By 2023, LVMH surpassed a valuation of over $500 billion. Bernard Arnault briefly became the wealthiest person alive, not by inventing revolutionary technology, not by solving engineering problems, not by disrupting industrial systems, but by understanding desire at extraordinary depth. Because the most important lesson inside the LVMH empire is not about fashion. It is about human wanting. The most durable fortunes in history are rarely built by giving people what they need. They are built by attaching products to identity, aspiration, status, and self-perception, then positioning the brand as a pathway towards psychological elevation itself. That is the real architecture underneath the empire. And it operates on millions of people every day without most of them fully noticing. Subscribe and turn on notifications for daily wealth psychology. The next video exposes how one LVMH brand transformed a simple waitlist into one of the most effective psychological sales systems in modern luxury history. Because Arnault's system becomes even more revealing the deeper you examine it. Most people assume the ultra-wealthy buy luxury goods because they can afford them. In reality, the psychology often works in reverse. The value of the object increases precisely because access remains limited. Behavioral economists describe this as Veblen consumption, where higher prices strengthen desirability because price itself becomes social information. The cost communicates exclusivity more effectively than the product alone ever could. Arnault did not merely understand this principle. He operationalized it globally. Louis Vuitton prices have increased repeatedly throughout Arnault's leadership, not primarily because production costs demanded it, not because materials suddenly became scarce, but because price increases serve a psychological purpose. They re-establish symbolic distance. They remind customers that the brand remains selective. They reinforce the perception that ownership itself has become more exclusive over time. Inside the LVMH system, the price increase becomes part of the product experience, and remarkably, customers often welcome it, because the existing owner now feels they acquired something whose symbolic value has strengthened since purchase. The object no longer feels disposable, it feels appreciating, socially, psychologically, sometimes even financially. That feeling changes the customer's relationship with the brand entirely. They stop thinking like consumers, they begin thinking like stakeholders. And stakeholders protect the systems validating their decisions. They defend the brand publicly. They rationalize the pricing. They recruit others into the ecosystem. They pass products across generations as symbolic assets tied to taste, status, and discernment. Arnault did not simply create customers. He created voluntary participants in the maintenance of the brand's prestige. That is one of the most sophisticated commercial systems ever constructed, because while technologies evolve, industries shift, and corporate dominance changes hands repeatedly, identity-driven desire remains remarkably durable, and Arnault attached his empire directly to that layer of human psychology. The most enduring empires are rarely the ones enforced through force alone. They are the ones people internalize willingly, the ones that become part of how individuals define aspiration, success, and themselves. Subscribe and turn on notifications for daily wealth psychology. The next video reveals how one LVMH brand transformed exclusivity itself into a sales weapon and built one of the most profitable products in luxury history through controlled scarcity alone.